Imagine you are sitting down in a darkened theater. The lights fade to black, the silver screen flickers to life, and you are just locked into this incredibly tense, deeply emotional climax of a movie.
Hmm.
Your heart is in your throat. Now, I want you to imagine that exact same scene, but with like absolutely no sound.
Right.
No sweeping strings, no pounding drums, no ominous synth hum, just silence. Suddenly, that epic battle or that heartbreaking goodbye feels, completely empty, doesn't it? It feels almost awkward.
Oh, it totally fundamentally breaks the illusion. I mean, we like to think that we go to the movies to watch them, but the reality is we go to feel them.
Yeah.
And the primary engine that is driving that feeling, often completely subconsciously, is the music.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to figure out why that music pulls our strings so perfectly, we're diving into some really brilliant research today. It's from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR.
Yeah, they put together this incredible piece.
They really did. They have this massive column tracing the media history of film music, and they frame it in a way that just, it immediately grabbed me. They call film scores movies for the ears.
I love that phrase.
Right. It's not just background noise. It is literally another script running parallel to the dialogue.
Which is a vital distinction to make right at the top, you know?
Mm.
The premise MMR establishes is that film music has this bizarre, almost dual identity.
Oh,
Well, inside the theater, it functions as that secondary script, manipulating your pulse and guiding your emotional reaction to the images. But outside the theater, it acts as an entirely independent work of art.
oh, wow.
Yeah. So the core of what we're looking at in this deep dive today is how the physical, technological vessel we use to listen to that music completely dictates our emotional connection to it.
Right. From sitting in front of a giant silver screen in 1930 to walking around that little piece of glass and metal sitting in your pocket right now. And every time the technology changes, our emotional relationship to the movie changes. But to really understand how wild this evolution is, we have to go way, way back.
Oh, yeah.
Before streaming, before the CD boom, before even the vinyl record.
Yeah.
We have to start in the silent era, pre-1920s.
Though, silent era is a bit of a historical inside joke because those theaters were rarely, if ever, actually silent.
Right, because of the live performers.
Exactly. But from a media perspective, MMR highlights something really crucial here. In this era, there was no recorded film music medium at all.
None.
It simply did not exist. The music was entirely ephemeral. The studio would just mail out giant stacks of sheet music alongside the film reels.
Like literal paper.
Literal paper. So if you were sitting in a theater in a big city, you might have a full, magnificent orchestra playing along to the picture.
That would be amazing.
But if you were in a small town, you probably just had a lone, exhausted piano player trying to keep up.
So every single screening of a film was essentially a completely unique, live, unrepeatable concert. If the piano player lost their place or hit a wrong note, that was your version of the movie that night.
Yeah, there was no physical record of the performance to take home.
But then 1927 hits. The jazz singer debuts. The era of the talkies begins. And this is what I really want to figure out. Before the invention of digital files, how did engineers physically attach an audio recording to a piece of plastic film?
It required a monumental leap in engineering. They called it sound on film, and it dominated the industry from the 1930s all the way through the 1950s.
Okay.
They essentially had to figure out how to translate invisible sound waves into a physical, visible medium.
So wait, was early optical sound basically just like a visual barcode for audio painted on the side of the film strip?
You're in the right ballpark, but it was far more dynamic than a static barcode.
How so?
Well, a barcode just holds a string of numbers, right?
Yeah.
Optical sound was a literal photograph of a sound wave.
Whoa.
Engineers created this system where they would expose a wavy, continuous visual line right along the very edge of the celluloid film strip.
A picture of a sound.
Exactly. When the projector ran the movie, a specialized exciter lamp would shine a bright beam of light directly through that wavy, transparent track.
Okay, I'm following.
And on the other side of the film, a photoelectric cell would read the rapid variations in the light coming through those waves, convert those light variations into electrical voltage, and that voltage would travel down a wire and vibrate the cone of the theater speaker.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. The light is literally playing the music.
It really is incredible.
And I guess this is where the word soundtrack actually originates.
What's fascinating here is that, yeah, it is. Today, we use soundtrack to mean a playlist on our phones. But back then, the word was entirely strictly literal.
The physical track.
It was the physical track of sound running physically parallel to the picture track on the celluloid.
Wow.
The music, the dialogue, the explosion sound effects, they were all just baked together into that one wavy line.
But that creates a massive problem for the listener, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
Because of that incredible technology, the music is now permanently shackled to the film reel. It is physically locked inside the projection booth.
Yes.
If you see a movie and you fall in love with a beautiful, sweeping romance theme, you can't just go to a store and buy it. You literally have to buy another movie ticket and sit through the whole film again.
Which is incredibly frustrating for audiences, you know?
Yeah.
And the technology kept iterating, making that music sound better and better.
Right.
So by the 1950s, the industry moved away from that visual optical sound and started using magnetic sound.
Like cassette tape material.
Exactly. Instead of a photographic waveform, they glued literal stripes of magnetic recording tape down the sides of the film prints.
Why the change, though? Was the light reading system just not good enough anymore?
Well, optical sound was brilliant, but it was noisy. Dust and scratches on the film would physically interrupt the light beam, causing pops and hisses.
Ah, that makes sense.
Plus, its frequency range was pretty narrow. Magnetic tape totally changed the game. It allowed for multiple channels, meaning true stereo sound in the theater, and a massively improved dynamic range.
Wow.
For the first time, the booming, bone-rattling lows of timpani drums and the crisp, piercing highs of a violin section could actually be reproduced faithfully.
But consumer demand is a powerful thing, right? People are sitting in these theaters, they're being blasted by this incredible high-fidelity magnetic stereo sound, and they want to escape the theater.
They want it in their hands.
Yeah, they want to take that emotion home with them.
And that collective desire is what finally forced the creation of the first real home mediums for film music, the vinyl, LP, and the EP, which pretty much dominated from the 1950s through the 1980s.
Right.
But getting the music out of the theater and into the living room meant subjecting it to severe physical constraints.
Because vinyl isn't digital, it is a physical object bound by the laws of physics and geometry.
Precisely. A standard 12-inch vinyl LP can only hold roughly 20 to 25 minutes of high-quality audio per side.
But a movie score is often 2 hours long.
Yep.
How do you fit an entire orchestral narrative onto a piece of wax? I know that bass frequencies actually take up more physical width in the grooves of a record.
That's right.
So if you have a huge booming action score, wouldn't the needle literally jump out of the groove if you tried to cram too much onto one disc?
That's the exact mechanical hurdle they faced. Because of the physical width of the grooves required for dynamic orchestral music, these vinyl releases were heavily compromised.
Oh, I see.
They were mostly highlight discs. You weren't getting the full narrative score.
Right.
You were getting the main title theme, maybe a love theme, and a couple of major action cues.
See, I have to push back on this era a bit.
Okay, go for it.
Because if you're only getting 40 minutes of a 2-hour score, vinyl soundtracks were basically just the cliff notes of the movie's emotional arc. Yeah. I mean, you get the bullet points, but you lose all the subtle connective tissue. If the whole point of a soundtrack is to let you re-experience the film in your mind, cutting out 70% of the music severely limits your ability to truly go on that journey again.
I'm going to stop you right there because calling them cliff notes does a massive disservice to the composers of that era.
Really?
Yeah. Curious definitely shared your frustration, absolutely. But you have to look at what the artist actually did to solve the problem. They didn't just chop the music up randomly.
What did they do?
Very often, a composer would go back into the recording studio and completely re-record and rearrange specific cues specifically for the vinyl album.
Oh, wait, really?
Yes. They were turning fragmented 2-minute cinematic underscore into beautifully structured, standalone 5-minute symphonic suites.
Wow, okay.
So I wouldn't call them cliff notes, I'd call them emotional distillations. They were optimizing the music to be an incredible living room experience.
Okay, that is a really fair point. They were treating the album as a separate piece of art rather than just an archival document of the movie.
Exactly.
But you just nailed the limitation there. It was a living room experience.
Yeah.
You had to sit actively in a chair next to a turntable to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the next massive paradigm shift in the 1970s and 80s, which fundamentally changed our psychological relationship with film music.
Portability.
The cassette tape. And, to a lesser, clunkier extent, the 8-track.
The glorious, awful cassette tape.
The cassette revolution completely democratized where and how we could experience cinematic emotion. The MMR column highlights some incredibly specific, potent examples of this era.
Like what?
Well, you have Jerry Goldsmith's brilliant jazz-infused score for A Patch of Blue. It was originally released in 1965, but it got an entirely new lease on cultural life when it was reissued on cassette in 1978.
Oh, interesting.
Or look at the massive footprint of the Mission Impossible theme, specifically the 1996 version by Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen from U2. That track moved millions of cassette singles. Think about what that did to the human experience, though. Before cassettes, film music was static. You went to the music. But with tapes, you could take it to the car.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine taking a sweeping, hyper-dramatic cinematic score and slamming it into your car stereo during a completely mundane Tuesday morning commute in the rain.
It changes everything.
You are suddenly the main character of your own life. The grocery store run becomes an epic quest because the physical vessel of the cassette allows you to overlay a composer's emotion onto your actual reality.
It deeply, intimately personalized the music. But cassettes had a fatal flaw.
The sound quality.
Right. They were portable, yes, but the audio quality was a noticeable step backward. You had constant tape hiss, the magnetic tape degraded over time, and you still had the physical interruption of having to eject the tape and flip it over halfway through the story.
The worst.
So to get closer to the pure emotion of the theater, the market needed a format that stripped away the physical noise entirely.
Enter the 1980s, the compact disc.
The CD was the moment the floodgates completely opened. It offered pristine, noiseless digital audio, but more importantly for film score fans, a single CD could hold up to 74 minutes of uninterrupted audio.
Finally, the time limit is broken.
Yes, the MMR column literally refers to this as the golden age of film music listening.
I can see why.
The CD's capacity allowed for the release of full, unedited, chronological scores. It spawned an entire cottage industry of specialty boutique soundtrack labels.
Like who?
Companies like La La Land Records, Intrada, and Varis Sarabande emerged. They catered directly to hardcore fans who wanted every single note recorded for the film.
Oh.
The article specifically cites Intrada's massive release of the Aliens' complete motion picture score.
Oh, that's a classic.
Right. You weren't just getting James Horner's highlight suite anymore. You were getting the entire terrifying, exhilarating sonic blueprint of the movie.
That's awesome.
Or take Ennio Morricone's heartbreaking 1989 score for Nuovo Cinema Paradiso. Hearing that on CD with that crystal clear clarity allowed listeners to just drown in the emotion without a pop or a hiss pulling them out of it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the CD boom created so much product that it completely blurred the lines for the average consumer.
Definitely.
So for you, the listener tuning in right now, if you open up your Spotify or Apple Music app and search for your favorite movie, you're going to see a lot of confusing labels.
Oh, yeah, it's a mess.
Let's settle a long-standing debate. What is the actual definitive difference between a soundtrack and a score?
It's a crucial distinction, and the MMR column breaks it down perfectly. A soundtrack, often labeled as an OST or original soundtrack, is essentially compilation style.
Okay.
It contains the songs used in the film, which very often includes pre-existing licensed tracks by various bands with vocals.
Like the Trainspotting album.
A perfect example. The Trainspotting OST is packed with 90s UK Britpop, Iggy Pop, and electronic music. Or the Tank Girl CD from 1995, which is a massive compilation of alternative rock and grunge.
Got it.
Those are soundtracks. A score, on the other hand, refers strictly to the incidental, original music written purely by the film's composer to play underneath the scenes.
The orchestral stuff, the synths, the mood.
Right. The example the source gives is Hans Zimmer's The Dark Knight score. That's pure instrumental composition designed specifically to drive the narrative tension.
Makes total sense.
Now, while CDs were perfecting that audio-only experience, the 1990s also brought DVDs and eventually Blu-rays. And this evolved our relationship with the music yet again because it tackled the spatial limitations of stereo sound.
Because now we are bringing the visuals back in, but with upgraded tech. For someone who doesn't know the jargon, what did home video actually change about the audio?
Well, home video introduced 5.1 channel surround sound and DTS spatial audio.
Which means what, exactly?
To put it simply, stereo sound, like on a CD or a cassette, puts the music in front of you like you were looking at a beautiful painting of a thunderstorm.
Okay.
But 5.1 spatial audio splits the music into different physical speakers all around your room. Suddenly, the French horns are behind you to the left, the pounding drums are shaking the floor beneath you, and the delicate strings are dead ahead.
Oh, wow.
It's the difference between looking at a painting of a thunderstorm and actually standing outside in the rain.
That is a brilliant way to put it. So the technology dictating how we listen is changing at breakneck speed. But I want to pivot slightly.
Sure.
How did all these shifting formats actually change the way the composers, the people writing the music, do their jobs?
The source outlines a fascinating three-generation shift. First, you have the John Williams generation.
A legend.
Absolutely. His era was defined by writing for analog acoustic spaces. You have a massive room, you put 80 musicians in it, you strategically place microphones to capture how the sound bounces off the walls, and you record that live human performance onto analog tape.
Right, capturing the physics of a real room.
Then you move to the Hans Zimmer generation, the digital natives. They are composing, recording, and mixing almost entirely inside a digital audio workstation.
Wait, explain what a DW actually means for the creative process. Is it just like a glorified word processor for sheet music?
Far from it. A DW is basically an infinite virtual orchestra inside a computer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Zimmer doesn't have to worry about the physics of a real room. If he wants the sound of 400 French horns playing at the exact same time, he doesn't have to hire 400 humans.
That would be expensive.
Very.
Mm.
He can load up incredibly realistic digital samples, layer them endlessly, and manipulate frequencies that acoustic instruments could never hit. He is designing the score from day one, knowing it's going to end up as a digital file.
That's incredible.
And finally, you have the modern composers, the streaming-led generation. They are writing for Netflix, for YouTube, or video games.
Right, the new media.
And they are mixing for Dolby Atmos and spatial audio right from the start. They're thinking about how the music functions in a purely digital, immersive ecosystem.
You know, I have to ask a philosophical question here.
Go ahead.
If composers today are building scores inside a computer, piecing together virtual instruments specifically engineered to sound perfectly balanced on a Netflix compression algorithm, does it lose something?
That's a huge debate.
I mean, does it lose that raw, messy humanity of the analog days, that feeling of 80 people breathing and bowing physical instruments together in a room?
You're touching on a massive cultural nerve right now.
Right.
And the MMR column points out that this exact tension has fueled a huge counter-movement collector culture. As the production and distribution of film music became entirely digital, invisible, and frankly a bit sterile, fans rebelled. They started aggressively craving that tactile, analog humanity you're talking about.
We want something we can actually hold. We want a proof that this music exists in the physical world.
Which is exactly why boutique vinyl labels like Death Waltz and Waxwork Records have exploded in popularity over the last decade.
I've seen those. They're beautiful.
They really are. They take film scores, particularly horror film scores, which rely so heavily on visceral human tension and imperfections, and treat them like fine art.
Yeah.
They do these incredibly elaborate reissues on heavy 180-gram colored vinyl with gorgeous newly commissioned jacket art. It's not just about the audio anymore, it's about holding the physical object.
Right.
Even the publication of physical sheet music remains highly valued among collectors. They want to hold the physical architecture of the notes in their hands.
It's almost like a rebellion against the cloud.
It really is.
But despite that collector's rebellion, we can't ignore the reality of the masses. The mainstream has completely moved into the digital and streaming eras. The 2000s and 2010s fundamentally changed our relationship with film music yet again.
The digital shift really took off with formats like MP3 and FLAC, and the difference between those two formats explains a lot about how we value music today.
How so?
Well, to fit thousands of songs onto an early iPod, the MP3 format uses lossy compression. It literally chops out the highest and lowest frequencies of the music data it assumes your human ear won't really miss to save digital space.
Okay, and FLAC.
FLAC, on the other hand, is lossless. It's an exact, massive digital replica of the studio master.
So we basically traded audio perfection for absolute convenience.
We did. And that convenience birthed platforms like iTunes and, crucially, Bandcamp.
Oh, I love Bandcamp.
It was a massive democratization of the film score because it allowed independent composers to directly release their unreleased tracks, alternate takes, and high-resolution FLAC files straight to the fans without needing a record label gatekeeper.
But then came Spotify and Apple Music, the all-you-can-eat subscription model.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious how you think the actual algorithm of those platforms has changed how we listen to scores.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the subscription model completely altered the financial and psychological incentives of listening. Because platforms pay out per stream, the algorithm highly incentivizes the listen while doing other things era. Background music, means zero skips, which means steady revenue.
Makes sense from a business standpoint.
Definitely. On streaming platforms, full narrative albums are often chopped up and atomized. You don't usually search for the Dark Knight score. You search for a cinematic mood playlist or an epic study BGM background music playlist.
Oh, totally.
The source points out that this is entirely blurring the boundary between a score's artistic value as a narrative tool and its functional use as audio wallpaper.
I see the danger in that, treating a masterpiece as just study beats.
Yeah.
But I'd argue there's a certain beauty in that separation, too. When you completely rip the music away from the context of the movie and just listen to it as pure audio, it allows for incredible new discoveries.
That's a good point.
The article actually mentions Thomas Newman. If you just put a Thomas Newman score on your headphones while you work, you suddenly catch all these tiny, weird percussive details, like a tapped glass or an odd synthetic scrape stuff that you completely missed when you were distracted by the dialogue and the explosions on screen.
Taking it out of the film definitely lets you study the brushstrokes up close. But the evolution doesn't stop with static streaming playlists.
What's next?
Next-generation media, like virtual reality and interactive video games, are now reintegrating the music and the visuals in entirely new, nonlinear ways.
How does that work in practice?
In a modern video game or a VR environment, the score isn't a static linear file that just plays from start to finish. It's broken into dynamic stems, individual tracks of drums, strings, synths.
Okay.
So if you walk into a dark cave in a game, the music engine reacts instantly, the drums might drop out, the eerie strings swell.
Wow.
If you draw a weapon, a brass section kicks in. The music is reintegrating with the visual, but the visual, and therefore the music, is now entirely controlled by your choices in real time.
Which brings us to the core philosophy of this whole MMR column, which I found just incredibly poetic.
The conclusion they reach is profound. They argue that film music, at its core, leaves a memory of time in our hearts.
Yeah.
It anchors us to exactly how we felt in a specific moment of our lives. The medium itself, whether that's a scratchy vinyl LP, a pristine CD, a hissing cassette tape in your old car, or an algorithm-generated Spotify stream, is simply a vessel of memory.
A vessel of memory.
Right. It is another playback device for the story, one that lives entirely in our minds.
So what does this all mean? Trace this whole journey with me. From literal photographic optical waveforms painted onto a celluloid strip trapped inside a theater, to a beautifully packaged colored vinyl on your shelf, all the way to a fragmented BGM playlist on your phone. The vessel holding the music fundamentally dictates how we remember the story. The physical format shapes our emotional recall.
The screen projects the image, but the speaker projects the emotion. And the mechanics of how that speaker gets fed, analog groove, magnetic tape, or digital stream colors the feeling forever.
It really makes you rethink what you're actually listening to. Which leads me to a final thought I want you, the listener, to ponder today.
What's that?
We just talked about the future being interactive, like those video games and VR experiences where the music dynamically shifts and branches based entirely on your personal choices.
Yeah.
If that becomes the norm, will the very concept of a static, recorded, original soundtrack album eventually go extinct?
Oh, wow.
If your emotional memory of a movie's music becomes entirely unique to your specific playthrough or your specific VR perspective, then maybe the ultimate vessel of memory isn't vinyl. It isn't a CD or a stream. Maybe the ultimate vessel is just you.
The fascinating question, the format becomes entirely internal.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you're sitting in a theater and the lights go down and that first invisible note hits your ears, take a moment to pay attention to the vessel. Until next time.